I found the letter tucked behind old holiday cards in Mark's nightstand drawer, written in his familiar, blocky handwriting. Emily, read this only if something happens to me. 4 months after my husband's truck skidded off that icy bridge during the blizzard last February, I was finally going through his things in our bedroom when my hand closed around the envelope that would unravel every single truth I'd held about the man I'd been married to for 23 years. I sat on the edge of our bed, the one where he'd kissed me goodnight every evening after coming home from the fire station, and stared at the envelope for a long time before tearing it open. Inside was a single handwritten letter dated just 10 days before his accident, along with a small key taped to the bottom of the page that looked like it belonged to a safe deposit box. If my story is hitting you hard right now, if you're feeling that same twist in your chest, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. There are more stories like this one, and I don't want you to miss the next. When I finally unfolded the letter, my husband's words stared back at me, but they weren't from the steady, protective man who'd carried me over the threshold of this house, who coached our daughter Lily's soccer team every spring, who always checked the doors twice at night because he knew storms made me nervous. His handwriting was shaky, the lines uneven, like he'd been writing through tears. "Emily," it began, his voice almost audible in my head. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time you knew who you've really been married to all this time." My heart started pounding so hard I had to sit down on the floor. Mark, my Mark, the man who'd proposed to me under the oak tree in Riverside Park, who'd held my hand through every contraction when Lily was born, took a deep breath in my imagination and continued the words I'd never expected to read. "My real name isn't Mark Thompson, it's Daniel Brooks. 24 years ago, I took the life of Mark Thompson and his whole family." The sentence hit me like ice water poured straight down my spine. I dropped the letter, my hands shaking too badly to hold it. My husband wasn't Mark Thompson. The man I'd built a home with, the father of my daughter, had been living under a stolen name for our entire marriage. I picked it up again, forcing myself to keep reading. "Emily, you need to know how it happened. Mark and I were best friends from the academy. Everyone said we looked like brothers, same height, same broad shoulders, same sandy hair and blue eyes that made recruits mix us up all the time." He wiped at his eyes in my mind, and I could picture the weight crushing him as he wrote. "That night we were supposed to celebrate Mark's parents' 40th anniversary at their lake house up near Crystal Lake. Mark had grown up bouncing between relatives after his mom died young, never really had stability until his dad remarried Anne, and they brought in his little sister Grace when she was 8. They became his real family, the one he'd always wanted. All those stories Mark told me about losing his mother young, about finally finding people who chose him, those were the stories that made me fall deeper in love with him, this man who'd overcome loss to become the most devoted husband and father. We'd been drinking at the party, everyone except me, since I was driving Mark's truck back. But Emily, after everyone else went to bed, I made the worst choice of my life. I had a bottle hidden in my gear bag, thought a couple swallows wouldn't hurt on the drive home. My stomach twisted as I realized where this was going. The roads were starting to freeze as the temperature dropped. I was going too fast, Emily, drunk and too fast on that narrow lake road. When I hit the patch of black ice near Willow Bend, I lost control completely. Mark's voice in my head broke as he described it. The truck rolled 4 times and landed in the frozen lake. When I came to, I'd been thrown clear, but Mark and his family, they were trapped inside. Emily, they didn't make it. The impact, the cold water rushing in. I ended 5 lives in one moment of pure stupidity. I felt sick reading those words. The man I'd loved had caused a crash that killed 5 people, including his best friend, and then lived as that friend for over 2 decades. When I heard the sirens, I panicked. I knew I'd been drinking, knew they'd test me, knew everything would be over. And that's when I saw that Mark and I were wearing almost identical turnout gear. Same station jackets, same boots. In the dark, with blood and the chaos, we looked so much alike that even our captain sometimes confused us from behind. I switched places with him, Emily. I dragged Mark's body to where I'd landed and put myself in the driver's seat. When the first responders arrived, our own crew, I told them Mark's stepmom, Anne, had been driving, that I was Mark Thompson, thrown clear in the crash. The room spun as I read that. My husband had not only caused the accident, but staged the scene to escape responsibility, letting an innocent woman take the blame after death. Because Mark had complicated family ties and few close relatives left, no one questioned my story deeply. I knew enough about his life from our friendship to answer questions. The trauma explained any differences people noticed later.
For 24 years, I've lived Mark's life. I took his position at the station, rose through the ranks using his record, met you at that charity auction wearing his name. Emily, every day has been heaven and hell, having the family Mark always wanted while knowing I stole it from him by taking his chance away. The letter went on for pages, detailing forged documents, the constant fear, the guilt that never left him. When I finished, I sat on our bedroom floor surrounded by 23 years of memories that suddenly felt like props in someone else's play. The man in our wedding photos wasn't Mark Thompson. The father teaching Lily to ride her bike wasn't who his badge said he was. The husband who'd pulled me from nightmares about losing him had been carrying this secret the whole time. The worst wasn't just the lie, it was realizing the calm, heroic man I'd known had been capable of such cold calculation right after causing unthinkable tragedy. Some secrets don't just hide the past, they rewrite everything you thought was real about the person sleeping beside you. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I drifted off, I saw Daniel's imagined face writing those words, confessing to crimes that had shaped our entire life together. I walked through our house in the dark, touching family photos with different eyes, wondering how many of our happiest moments were built on stolen time. The man smiling with Lily on his shoulders at her 5th birthday wasn't the person his firefighter pension was made out to his name. The husband who'd worked double shifts to pay for our Disney trip had been living Mark Thompson's career, earning Mark Thompson's honors. By morning, I'd made a decision that felt impossible 24 hours earlier. I called the station and told Captain Reyes I needed a personal day, that grief was hitting harder than expected. Then I drove to the bank with the small key from Mark's letter, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The safe deposit box contained everything he'd promised in the letter: detailed journals, copies of the original accident report, photographs, and a thick file labeled "For Authorities and Families." But the real proof was a flash drive with a video time-stamped the same date as the letter. I couldn't watch it there. I drove home and sat in Mark's recliner, the one he'd fallen asleep in every Sunday watching football, and plugged it into our laptop. Daniel's face filled the screen, looking older and more broken than I'd ever seen Mark appear. "Emily," he started, voice cracking immediately. "I tried to write this all down, but I needed you to hear it from me, too. If you're watching this, my plan worked. I'm gone, and you're finding the truth I was too cowardly to tell you while alive." He explained everything again, slower this time, with more pain. How he'd studied Mark's personnel file during recovery, memorized every detail of his childhood stories, practiced his signature until it matched perfectly. The hardest part wasn't becoming Mark on paper, he said, eyes red. It was becoming the man he was inside while carrying what I'd done. I threw myself into being the best firefighter I could be, hoping somehow it would balance the scales. I paused the video when he started crying about meeting me. The man I'd fallen for at that auction, who'd asked me to dance with such shy gratitude, had been carrying this weight the whole time. When I pressed play again, he was composed but destroyed. "I fell in love with you the moment you laughed at my terrible joke about turnout gear," he said. "You made me want to deserve the life I was living, even knowing I never could." When Lily was born, his voice broke completely. Holding her, knowing she was alive because Mark wasn't, it nearly killed me some days. The video ended with instructions for the restitution fund he'd set up. $350,000 in investments, liquidated quietly over years, designated for the Thompson and Brooks families. "Do what you think is right with this, Emily. I was going to confess last year, but I couldn't face losing you both. I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but it's all I have left." I sat frozen until Lily came home from her college classes. Looking at our 19-year-old daughter, with Mark's blue eyes and my dark hair, I felt the full weight of what this truth would do to her. She'd grown up idolizing her firefighter dad, planning to follow him into public service. "Mom, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just going through your dad's things. Found some stuff that's complicated." She hugged me, smelling of coffee and winter air. Dad always said complicated didn't mean bad, that people could make terrible mistakes and still be worth loving. I nearly broke down hearing her repeat words that now felt poisoned by context. "Lily, some complications are bigger than others." She pulled back, studying my face. "Mom, I actually found something weird in Dad's old locker at the station last month when I visited." My pulse spiked. "What kind of thing?" "Some papers that don't match his stories, like references to a family in Portland he never mentioned, and medical records showing a different blood type than what his file says." I realized Daniel's carefully built life was cracking under Lily's natural curiosity, just like it had for me with that envelope.
Lily, let's table this for now. Some things need more context. "But Mom, don't you want to know if Dad was hiding something big?" The irony burned. She was asking exactly what I'd just learned, but I wasn't ready to destroy her world yet. "Sometimes, baby, knowing everything isn't the gift we think it is." "Are you saying Dad had secrets that would hurt us to know?" I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd inherited Daniel's courage and Mark's kindness, and felt the impossible choice settling on my shoulders. "I'm saying some truths change everything, and we need to be ready before we face them." That night, after Lily went to bed, I watched the video again, focusing on details I'd missed in shock. Daniel described how he'd used his recovery time to perfect Mark's mannerisms, how he'd explained any personality shifts as PTSD from surviving the crash. "I became the firefighter Mark wanted to be," he said quietly. "Not to hide better, but because I owed him that much. Every life saved, every call run perfectly, it was supposed to be his." I thought about the commendations on our wall, the ceremonies where Mark had been honored for bravery. Had that excellence been genuine service or endless atonement? The worst moments came when he talked about our life together. "When you said yes to marrying me, Emily, I almost told you everything, but I was terrified you'd walk away, and I convinced myself our happiness mattered more than ancient truth." He'd cried, describing Lily's birth. "She has Mark's eyes. Every time I look at her, I see what I took from him." When the video ended, I felt hollowed out. Was our love real if it was built on such deception? My phone buzzed, Lily texting from her room that she couldn't sleep, that something felt wrong about Dad's stuff. "Mom, can we talk tomorrow? I found more today." I typed back that we'd talk soon, then stared at the ceiling until dawn. Some secrets, I was learning, couldn't stay buried once curious hearts started digging, and some daughters deserved truth even when it would shatter the father they'd worshipped. Lily came downstairs early carrying a folder of documents she'd apparently collected.
Mom, I've been piecing things together and nothing makes sense. Dad always said he grew up mostly with his aunt in Portland after losing his parents young, but these letters mention a completely different family. I looked at her evidence. Letters addressed to Daniel Brooks, medical discrepancies, photos of a younger man who looked almost identical to Mark but wasn't quite him. My daughter had inherited her father's investigative instincts. Lily, before you go further, I need to ask, how would you handle learning your dad wasn't exactly who he said he was? Her eyes widened. Like a different name or something? More than that. Discovering the foundation of his identity, our family, wasn't what we've always believed. She sat down hard. Mom, are you saying Dad lied about who he was? I realized gradual revelation wasn't possible anymore. Lily, yesterday I found something he left for me, something that explains everything you've been finding, but it's going to hurt. What is it? I got the flash drive and set up the laptop between us. Your dad made this video 10 days before his accident. What you're about to hear will change how you see everything. I pressed play and watched Lily's face crumble as Daniel confessed. When he reached the part about switching places in the wreckage, she paused it. Mom, is he saying he caused the crash that killed 5 people and then pretended to be Dad to escape punishment? Yes, baby, that's exactly what he's saying. So our whole life, everything, is based on him stealing Dad's, Mark's, identity? I nodded, watching her process that the heroic father she'd known had committed terrible crimes. We watched the rest together, Daniel describing meeting me, falling in love, struggling with guilt while trying to be the husband and father Mark would have been. When he talked about Lily's birth, both of us were crying. Mom, he sounds tormented, like he really loved us. He did love us, but that love was complicated by what he'd done, by living a life that wasn't his to live. But he saved lives as a firefighter. He was a good dad. Does this erase all that? No, but it means our happiness came at the cost of another family's tragedy, and Mark Thompson never got to live the life Dad, Daniel, lived instead. When the video ended, Lily sat silent for a long time. Mom, what does this mean for me? Am I legally Lily Thompson or Lily Brooks? Is your marriage even real?
Those are questions I've been asking since yesterday, and there's more. He left materials for making things right with the families he hurt. Lily looked overwhelmed. If we tell people, we'll destroy Dad's reputation. Everyone at the station thinks he was a hero. But if we don't, we're protecting lies that hurt other people who are still grieving. I watched my daughter grasp the same moral crossroads I'd been standing at. Some children inherit not just love, but the consequences of their parents' worst choices. Lily and I spent days going through the safe deposit box materials. Behind a false panel, we found Daniel's complete documentation: accident scene diagrams, timeline of the identity switch, forged credential records, and letters he'd written but never sent to both families. Lily, this isn't just confession, it's everything needed to prove what really happened that night. We found the financial records too, $350,000 set aside, with specific amounts designated for each surviving family member. Dad was serious about confessing, he just died first. Do you think his accident was really an accident, Mom? Or did he... I've wondered the same thing. That blizzard, that bridge, he knew those roads perfectly, but we'll never know. What matters is what we do with what he left us. We spread everything across the kitchen table, creating a complete picture of Daniel's crimes and his unfinished atonement. Mom, if we go public, my whole identity changes. I'll have to explain to everyone why my last name isn't Thompson anymore. Your marriage, the house, Dad's pension, everything gets questioned. But if we stay quiet, Mark Thompson's family keeps believing Anne caused the crash. Daniel's family keeps thinking he died that night or disappeared. Lily was quiet for hours, processing the cost of truth versus silence.
Mom, I need to ask something hard. Did you ever suspect Dad wasn't completely honest? I thought about all the nights he'd woken from nightmares, claiming they were about fire calls, the way he'd get emotional about drunk driving PSAs. There were moments he seemed haunted. I thought it was survivor guilt from the crash he supposedly lived through. Now I think it was guilt for causing it. Did he ever try to tell you? Yes. Last year especially, he'd start serious conversations and then back away. I think he was building courage and ran out of time. That week, I called our family attorney, Susan Parker, and explained everything. After reviewing copies of Daniel's materials, she confirmed what we'd feared. Emily, this is unprecedented. Your husband's confession proves vehicular manslaughter and extensive identity fraud. His death prevents criminal charges, but civil and administrative consequences will be significant. Like what? Your marriage may need retroactive validation. Lily's birth certificate lists Mark Thompson as father. That'll require legal correction. Pension, benefits, property titles, all potentially affected. What do you recommend? Full cooperation with authorities with representation to protect your interests. Daniel's documentation shows genuine remorse. Following through honors that intent and serves the victims. Lily and I made our choice that night. We'd complete what Daniel started, reveal everything to authorities and families, whatever it cost us personally. Some truths demand daylight even when darkness would be easier. Our first contact was Daniel's parents in Portland, using addresses from his unsent letters. Mrs. Brooks, this is Emily Thompson calling about your son Daniel, who you lost contact with after a crash in 2000. The silence lasted forever before Patricia Brooks whispered, Daniel? Our Danny? Do you know where he's been? Mrs. Brooks, this is difficult, but Daniel survived that crash and has been living under another name. He passed away 4 months ago, but left materials explaining everything. He's been alive all this time? I heard tears and someone collapsing in the background. We arranged to meet in person 2 days later, driving to Portland with Daniel's letters and confession materials. Patricia and Thomas Brooks were in their late 70s, faces lined with 24 years of wondering if their son was dead or had abandoned them. For decades, we hoped he'd lost his memory or couldn't reach us, Patricia said, holding the letter Daniel wrote her. We never stopped loving him. They read about the drunk driving, the crash, the identity switch. Thomas's voice shook. Our boy caused that accident? Killed 5 people, including his best friend? And then lived as that friend to escape justice? Lily spoke quietly. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, the man you raised became a good husband and father. He saved lives as a firefighter and loved his family deeply. But yes, he built that life on terrible lies. Patricia cried reading Daniel's apology. He says he was too ashamed to face us, that he thought we'd be better off thinking he died a hero, survivor, than knowing he was responsible. What will you do with this information? We're taking it to authorities and the Thompson family. Daniel prepared everything needed for the truth to come out. Even though it will destroy the life he built? Because it's what he wanted in the end, and because the people he hurt deserve answers. Next, we met with Detective Harris, who handled cold cases for the state police. After reviewing Daniel's materials, he confirmed the original investigation concluded Ann Thompson had been driving based on the staged scene. This documentation completely changes that conclusion. We'll work to officially clear Mrs. Thompson's name and notify surviving relatives. There will be investigations into the identity fraud affecting benefits and records. Why come forward now instead of protecting your husband's memory? Because he spent years preparing to take responsibility, and because silence would continue harming innocent people. Driving home, Lily and I knew we'd started something irreversible. Some choices, once made, reshape everything that follows, but some secrets demand exposure, no matter the personal cost. The hardest meeting was with Laura Thompson, Mark's sister and the closest surviving relative. Now 55, she'd spent 24 years angry at her stepmother Anne for causing the crash that killed her father, brother, and 3 others. Learning Anne was innocent brought both relief and fresh rage. Relief that Anne wasn't reckless with our lives, Laura said, but fury that some stranger manipulated everything to blame her posthumously. We gave her Daniel's letter explaining his friendship with Mark, their physical similarity, the panic that led to the switch. He writes that they looked so alike people called them twins, Laura noted. That Mark had shared his whole history because he trusted Daniel completely. Lily explained, "My father spent years perfecting Mark's life to make the deception work. He became the firefighter Mark wanted to be." Laura's eyes hardened. "Your father stole my brother's future. Mark wanted to make lieutenant, maybe chief someday. He wanted a big family." Daniel's excellence doesn't erase that theft, but he tried to honor Mark's ambitions with his own career. Money from the restitution fund is designated for your family too. It doesn't replace Mark, but it's what he could offer. Laura studied photos of the real Mark. Same build, same eyes, same smile that had fooled everyone. "Mrs. Thompson, what's happening with the name Mark Thompson now? Will your daughter keep using my dead brother's identity?" "I've been thinking about that," Lily said quietly. "The name Lily Thompson is 20 years of my life, but it's built on theft. I've decided to legally become Lily Brooks, honoring my father's real name while acknowledging truth. I felt overwhelming pride in my daughter's grace. Some healing begins with returning what was stolen, even when it hurts." We also met with Anne Thompson's brother and sister-in-law, who'd carried decades of confusion about how careful Anne could have caused such tragedy. Learning she was blameless restored her memory in ways they'd never expected. "We've wondered for years how Anne could have been so irresponsible," Uncle Richard said. "Knowing she was a victim changes everything about how we remember that night."
But it means accepting a stranger destroyed our family and lived my nephew's life instead, Aunt Diane added. The complexity sat heavy between us all. Over months, legal proceedings untangled Daniel's web. Our marriage was validated retroactively. Lily became legally Lily Brooks. The fire department transferred Daniel's pension contributions to victim families per court order. Chief Morales called about handling Daniel's legacy. "Emily, we're struggling with 20 years of outstanding service by someone using fraudulent identity. His saves, his commendations, they were real. But legally, Mark Thompson never worked here. Daniel Brooks did, under false pretenses. We're documenting his effectiveness while noting the identity issues. Pension funds go to victims. Former colleagues have reached out saying his mentoring changed their careers." Media coverage stayed respectful, headlines about cold case resolution and justice for the Thompson family, rather than sensationalism. 24-year-old fatal crash truth revealed through posthumous confession, the local paper read. Lily asked the question weighing on us both. "Mom, do you think we did the right thing? We could have kept quiet and preserved Dad's hero status." I thought about Laura's relief, the Brooks discovering their son lived longer than believed. Anne's name cleared. Some truths matter more than comfortable lies. Some daughters inherit the chance to make their father's unfinished amends. A year later, we attended a memorial service combining both families. Laura spoke about her brother Mark's dreams. Patricia spoke about Daniel's childhood and their decades of hope. Lily spoke about the father who'd raised her, flawed, guilty, but devoted. "I grew up believing I was Lily Thompson, daughter of a heroic firefighter," Lily said. "Now I'm Lily Brooks, daughter of a man who made catastrophic choices, but spent decades trying to honor the friend he lost. Both versions of my father taught me about courage, service, and the weight of truth. I spoke last about loving someone whose life was built on deception, but whose heart eventually chose honesty. Daniel Brooks lived 24 years as Mark Thompson, but his final act allowed both men's stories to find peace.
The truth devastated us, but it also freed multiple families to heal. Afterward, Laura approached with a proposal. We'd like to establish a scholarship in Mark Thompson's name for children of first responders pursuing public safety careers, funded partly by Daniel's restitution and community donations. It felt right, transforming tragedy into opportunity, honoring Mark's actual dreams. Some redemption comes not from hiding pain, but channeling it toward good. 2 years after finding Daniel's letter, the Mark Thompson Memorial Scholarship had awarded 8 students. Lily became deeply involved, finding purpose in turning her father's crimes into futures for others. "Mom, meeting these kids helps me understand Dad better," Lily said after an award ceremony. "They remind me of who Mark might have become, using hard circumstances to help others rather than destroy them." And how does that change how you see your father? It doesn't erase what he did, but it explains why he was so passionate about saving lives. He was trying to balance scales that could never balance. That summer, Lily graduated with her degree in emergency management and joined the fire academy, following both men's paths, but with honesty they'd lacked. She trained under instructors who'd known Mark Thompson and now understood the full story. On her first day, I watched her stand tall in turnout gear, eyes fierce with purpose. "This is who I am," she'd told her class. Lily Brooks, daughter of Daniel Brooks, who served this department as Mark Thompson for 20 years. "I'm here to honor service, truth, and second chances." Students and instructors responded to her authenticity. That evening, Laura called with news that brought everything full circle. Among Mark's stored belongings, we'd found letters between him and Daniel, showing Mark had been helping Daniel with drinking issues before the crash. Mark was trying to save Daniel from the choices that ultimately killed him. The tragedy runs deeper than we knew. Mark died helping the friend who caused his death. Reading those letters helped Lily understand Daniel's torment differently. When he talked about trying to deserve our love, he was also trying to deserve Mark's friendship. When he pushed himself to excellence, he was honoring specific promises they'd made about service. 3 years after that envelope changed everything, Lily became the first female lieutenant in our district at just 25. The ceremony was held in the station bay where Mark Thompson had received his own promotions. Standing there watching my daughter pin on her badge, I felt Daniel's presence, not as the hero we'd believed in, but as the complicated man who'd tried, too late, to make things right. His confession devastated us, but it also cleared innocent names, reunited grieving parents with their son's full story, and created opportunities for young people chasing the dreams Mark Thompson never got to live. Some husbands leave letters that destroy worlds. Mine left one that, through pain and truth, helped rebuild several. The envelope had been hiding behind old holiday cards in Mark's nightstand drawer, labeled, "Emily, read this only if something happens to me." But what it really contained was the chance to transform stolen years into honest healing, for Mark's family, for Daniel's, and for the daughter who chose to carry both legacies forward with open eyes. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if you've ever carried complicated truth about someone you loved, please share your experience in the comments. And if these stories of resilience and honesty speak to you, subscribe to the channel. There are more journeys like mine waiting, and I don't want you to miss them.